Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
What question do we ask on a morning like this? It's astonishing, really, to reflect that Boris Johnson appears to have successfully positioned himself this morning with much of the electorate, successfully with much of the electorate, and by no means with all of it, thank goodness, as being simultaneously both wanting and not wanting a general election. I saw something yesterday. I read something yesterday which I did a double take, because, I mean, I try like you do to keep up with events, but everything is so unprecedented and or chaotic at the moment that I think we could all be forgiven for missing the odd trick, or indeed for thinking that someone else might have missed the odd trick. But there's at least a realistic, slim to non-existent, but realistic chance that Jeremy Corbyn could be, wait for it, trying to form a government by tea time. I mean, everything, I think, is up for grabs today, and Boris Johnson, almost inevitably, I mean, there's a poetic justice to it, if not an actual legal one, although, of course, legal justice is something that he is reportedly considering ignoring in the context of Brexit. The fact that he finds himself in Ireland on this of all mornings is incredible. Did you hear Dominic Raab saying that they've got a plan, but they can't actually tell anyone what it is yet in case it gets leaked? I know. It's great, isn't it? 5 minutes into the programme, we've already found something to smile about. Old Dominic Raab, the gift that keeps on giving. We've got a plan, but we can't tell anybody what it is yet. We certainly can't tell you what it is. You're just a scummy voter. We can't tell you what it is. You're a journalist. Can't tell journalists that are cheerleading for us what it is, in case they leak it. And we can't tell the EU what it is either, because then it might get leaked and people might criticise it. I'll double-check that clip for you. It was on the Sophie Ridge programme on Sky News yesterday. I live my life according to clips, really. I very rarely watch anything from beginning to end. It's almost like Theo Washwood has changed my entire attitude to politics. I'll wait for the roundup. I'll wait for the highlights. Speaking of which, Theo Washwood will be joining us shortly to give us a roundup of the press conference, the joint press conference that Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar have just given in Dublin. Looking at the subtitles, Johnson has said he's not expecting a complete breakthrough during talks with the Irish Taoiseach today. So, I remember, and you might do as well, and this is probably going to be hard to believe given the amount of water that has now passed under the bridge, but do you remember when stuff still took you by surprise? And the bit where we've all failed, especially me, or Remainers, or whatever you want to call us, I think where we've all failed is not improperly communicating that it really took us all by surprise. You know, that there is something quite unattractive, and goodness knows I should know, about the rhetoric of "I told you so." It doesn't really help anybody, does it? It doesn't achieve anything. If there's a reason behind it, looking back over the carnage of the last couple of years, it would be, as I said to you on June the 24th, 2016, if we let these lies go unchecked, the lies which I'm afraid did get Brexit over the line, but it doesn't make mugs or liars of everyone who voted for it. If we let these lies go unchecked, what will be next? I think most of us would have liked nothing more than just to make a short list of all the tangible benefits that were on the horizon, try to put out of our minds all the obvious negatives that were likely to ensue, and then we could have all just sort of knuckled down, and in good old British fashion, we could have just got on with it. But it became clear very quickly that there weren't any tangible benefits. There still aren't. It's astonishing, isn't it, in September of 2019, that I can respond to a referendum from June of 2016 and say, can we open up the phone lines now for the things that are going to be great? And no one would ring me. Well, maybe they would now, but all they'd be able to say is essentially variations upon the theme of "I don't really understand what trade agreements are, what sovereignty means, or why there's a finite amount of fish in the sea, wherever that sea may be." It's amazing that does seem to have just sort of been smuggled in unchallenged and unchecked. We've reached a point now where nobody can offer up a genuine, tangible benefit. My life will improve in this way. Your life will improve in this way. And no one seems to care anymore. We have to crack on with this thing because we voted for it. Why did you vote for it? Well, turns out the reasons were a little bit different from the emergent reality, but we've still got to crack on with it. And I get that as well. And then you hear someone like Leo Varadkar, essentially staring with the same sense of bewildered befuddlement, to coin a brief tautology, that many of the rest of us feel. And then you sort of, occasionally, if you're anything like me, you turn to the other lot, hoping for a chink in the armour of your pessimism, looking for something, well, that's all right, then we can get behind that. And there's nothing there. I've got a little clip here of what I'm told, and obviously I'm flying blind here in a live broadcast. The speech has been unfolding while I'm boring you rigid with my latest pontifications. There's a sort of a clip in which Boris Johnson apparently describes what will happen to the backstop. So you'll remember that Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary and as a prominent backbencher and as the leader, this is the crucial point, I think, of his CV, the leader of the Vote Leave campaign, the leader, that is, the co-leader of the Vote Leave campaign, has apparently now deigned to reveal how he will accommodate Brexit with the Good Friday Agreement. Are you ready for this? I haven't heard it, so this could be the mother of all climb downs for me. I could be about to say, good grief. Well, fair play to the fella. I never saw that one coming. What has he pulled out of the bag? What has he pulled out of his hat? And does it look anything like a rabbit?
Isn't it still the truth that as the 31st of October draws near, that no backstop would still be better for Ireland than no deal?
Well, Carl, first of all, there are an abundance of proposals that we have, but I just don't think, if I may say so, I think it entirely reasonable to share them with you today, Carl. We will be producing ideas for our friends and partners, not least here in Dublin, about how to take this forward. We have, I've indicated the areas in which we think progress needs to be made, and I think also progress will need to be made on the political declaration as well as to the body of the text of the current withdrawal treaty. But be in no doubt that we can do it, we have the time to do it, and we are going to address this very, very enthusiastically. And I think we have really the ideal amount of time in which to get this kind of thing done. Angela Merkel set I think she said it should be 30 days would be enough. 30 years was certainly, it would go on for 30 years if we didn't concentrate our minds. 30 days ought to be enough, she said, and I think she's totally right. If we really focus, I think that we can make a huge amount of progress.
Of course, Angela Merkel didn't say that. I almost feel it's pointless reminding you. What she said was something along the lines of, could take 20 years, could take 2 years, could take 30 days. Almost a sarcasm. How many days ago was that? Can we check? It can't be far off 30 days ago, can it? Although I appreciate time moves grindingly slow at the moment. So I've got a theory, and I'm going to share it with you. But it is only a theory, and it's really scary, all right? And I know there are still plenty of good people on all sides of the argument, so possibly my fears are a little bit hyperbolical, if that's the correct word. It was 19 days ago, I think, that Angela Merkel said that, thank you. So we've got 11 days to go. I think that we've entered a weird period where a Prime Minister, and you can expect this from spin doctors or commentators perhaps, or even politicians who don't have to deal with reality. But Prime Ministers do have to deal with reality. Johnson's had a week in which his collision with reality has been spectacular. And yet, you think about the Irish backstop. We've got a plan, but we can't tell you what it is yet. We can't tell anyone what it is yet. When it is published, which presumably, and I genuinely don't know anything anymore, but presumably it will have to be published before they can claim that it has failed because of EU intransigence, even though the EU have said, well, also, if you're like trying to persuade somebody to do something, surely, surely the sooner you start talking about what it is you're proposing, the better. That's Boris Johnson essentially finding himself in the incredibly humiliating position of having to ape Dominic Raab there and claim there is a brilliant plan. We just can't tell you what it is yet. It goes, proverbially, to a different school. We've got a great plan, but it goes to a different school. Of course I've got a plan. It just goes to a different school. Shut up. Yeah, I have. I've got a plan. Shut up. All right, I've got a plan. It just goes to a different school. So, on the backstop, we're supposed to believe that there is a plan, but they can't tell us what it is. On the election, we're supposed to believe that Boris Johnson doesn't want it, but also that he does, and Jeremy Corbyn is some sort of coward for not letting him have it. And on the whole question, the whole sort of question of Brexit, we're supposed to believe that people simultaneously voted for things that are impossible to deliver in tandem. You know, whether or not we voted to have brilliant trade deals and trade agreements, or we voted to be on WTO terms, which is the polar opposite. Do you know also, I think I've got this right, the Americans are vetoing new appointments, new judges' appointments to the WTO, so it is, to all intents and purposes, broken at the moment. And yet you will still presumably be able to turn on your radio later today and find somebody claiming that's the way forward. So I just cautiously suggest that we've entered the upside down. And I don't mean to be glib. I just mean we are, as someone who's watching from the outside, like you, presuming, I mean, some politicians will be listening, but most of us, actually even no one's involved in these negotiations. They've reduced the negotiating team down to 4, according to the Times this morning. But if we're, and it's not the same old story about false equivalence and balance and all of that. It's this notion of the British public are being told 2 completely contradictory things by the British Prime Minister. Leave everybody else out of it. He wants an election, but he doesn't want an election. He's got a plan, but he hasn't got a plan. I don't get it. I don't get it. What's he up to? Is he just, as I suspect, making it up as he goes along and betting the house on the fact that the more negative the portrayal of the European Union, and tragically the more negative the portrayal of the British Parliament, the better it will be for him? Here you go. What is Dominic Cummings's theory? I'll take almost anything you've got on this, but it will be, I'm afraid, examined through the lens of reality. So you say his theory is this, and I might say, well, how does that fit into it? And it doesn't have to be copper bottom. God knows, I'm standing here boasting about my own ignorance on the issue, so I'm not going to give you a coating for not having 101 answers to my 100 questions. But what's the plan? Not the plan on Ireland, because, you know, they can't tell us what that is in case we understand it. The overall plan. What's the plan? He wants an election before October the 31st. If it comes after October the 31st, Nigel Farage becomes revivified as the only player left in the game who can continue to deny reality. That's a very powerful position. Don't underestimate it. A number of people that have swallowed the last round of snake oil and nonsense will only diminish a little bit. Most people who swallowed snake oil sign up for another dose, because the alternative is, of course, to admit that the magic potion you took last year was not a magic potion at all. So he becomes a bigger player by dint of being the only one left that continued to deny reality and peddle fact-free nonsense. So what's the plan? What's the plan? And how's it going? 0345 6060 973. What's the plan and how's it going? And I'm going to tell you now, if you can answer this in a convincing and a compelling fashion, I would put you in the top 3 political commentators in this country. Actually, no, I'm not saying you'd be the best, but I'd put you in the top 1. I could have put that a little better. Well, I say to you, what's the plan? I don't think there's any answer to that question that doesn't involve some of what our Prime Minister is saying publicly being, in your mind, untrue. But that is the plan. And that doesn't matter whether you're a critic or an admirer of Boris Johnson. You know, we did cross that astonishing Rubicon a week and a half ago, where prominent newspaper columnists started actually saying, I know he's lying and I love it. That I don't think you can analyse or describe Boris Johnson's plan without signing up to that, saying, I know he's lying and I love it, or I know he's lying and I hate it? How can he be simultaneously in favour of and against an election? How can he have a plan that he's not allowed or able to show anybody, even the people who need to see it? I don't know. Michael's in Newbury. Michael, over to you.
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well. What's the plan?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious, actually. He's between a rock and a hard place because of Farage and the Brexit Party.
Yes.
With their statement that they've got to have a clean exit, and that means a no-deal exit.
No idea Brexit.
Yeah, exactly. So
because again, to coin a phrase, that is the only way you can avoid telling people what your plan is.
Exactly.
Right.
You haven't got anything written down. No, you and I are totally in agreement on that.
Yes.
So here's his conundrum. So if he could have an election before the October the 31st, he believes he can win it without the help of the Brexit Party, provided he can convince all these Brexiters that we are coming out on October the 31st.
Yes.
No ifs, no buts.
Or that if we don't, it wasn't his fault.
Exactly. But he only stands a chance of winning that election before the October the 31st if he can convince them. If he can't, he knows they'll vote Brexit.
And then he'd need some sort of pact, and that, of course, you know, you get into bed with somebody vile in order to garner a few points in a referendum.
31st,
yes.
He has no choice. He will have to do a deal with the Brexit Party to win. Otherwise he has no chance. And, you know, that has huge implications for the Conservative Party, because we know the Brexit Party is UKIP by another name, with all the toxicity, you know, it's a very toxic, it was a fairly toxic party, and all those people are now in the Brexit Party. Not all of them are UKIP by any means, but the UKIP mob are there. And I think an awful lot of Conservatives, under those circumstances, will walk. So I think he's lying.
So there's no real plan apart from seeing off Farage and the Brexit Party Limited?
Yeah, he wants to try and do it without them, and he knows...
Sometimes we overthink stuff, don't we?
Before October 31st, he has no choice. Otherwise, he's going to be annihilated.
And the more he gets bruised by his encounters with reality, oddly, the more acute the threat of the person who doesn't have to deal with reality becomes. He's almost suffering... He's being almost hoisted by his own petard, isn't he? Because when Theresa May was in charge, he could be the one on the sideline saying, well, things would be going so much better if only we all believed a bit more, if only we had some optimism and a can-do attitude, if only yada, 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 yada. And now he's got the gig. He is, of course, forced to confront reality. Farage on the fringes can still keep saying, if only we all believed a bit more, fish and passports and sundry other nonsense. So he's now getting from Farage what he gave to Theresa May.
Yeah, exactly. And Farage is in a very strong position now.
Increasingly.
He's got a lot of control over the whole of the Conservative Party. So,
but it's I mean, it's a dismal strength, because it's a strength born of being the only one left standing who doesn't have to acknowledge reality or tell the truth.
I know.
Wow. So the plan is solely... Hang on. The plan is solely and exclusively to get over the wire with regard to the Brexit Party Limited. Everything else is secondary at the moment. So if we're looking for 2-year analyses, or we're looking at Ireland, it doesn't actually... in
their reckoning.
They don't really care that much. They know they have to go and do speeches like the one today. They have to break the bread. They have to claim there's a plan. But deep down, if crashing out with a no-idea kamikaze Brexit, or if somehow portraying the Parliament as the enemy of the people, all of these things they will contemplate, because the survival of the Conservative Party depends upon it.
Quite right. And it's all now about an election. That's all it's about.
But if it's a Conservative Party in which there is no place for Sir Nicholas Soames or Philip Hammond or Ken Clarke, or indeed a Conservative Party in which the likes of a Conservative government, in which the likes of Amber Rudd feel that they cannot serve, what is it that they're protecting and saving?
Well, I know, but, I mean, their only chance of preserving those people is to have an election before October the 31st, and that's not going to happen.
And because there are some people, in fact, a surprising number, perhaps, of people on the Conservative benches, past and present, who are so cognizant of the absurdity of a no-idea Brexit that they will prioritise stopping it above everything else.
Exactly.
And, of course, it might not be enough. Thank you, Michael. 27 minutes after 10. I would welcome a slightly longer-term plan. If you think there is a longer-term plan, it's all about seeing off the threat of the Brexit Party Limited, because there are plenty of voters out there still buying the snake oil, still signing up for the Kool-Aid, and we know there are. They're kind enough to get in touch with me on a regular basis. But that's pretty bleak, isn't it? If that's what our office of Prime Minister has been reduced to, fending off the spivs and liars into whose bed you had to climb in order to get your stupid referendum over the line. What did you think was going to happen when you started green-lighting the vile racism of that Breaking Point poster? What did you think was going to happen when you started repeating the utterly fraudulent rhetoric of not being able to control our borders and our money? What did you think was going to happen? Do you think these lies just fold up and go away? These liars just hang up their hats and sit down? Have a look at the history of humanity. If you don't challenge falsehood, if you don't challenge fraudulence, if you don't challenge bigotry, it doesn't wither and die. It grows and consumes all before it. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. I've only got about a minute. I hope that's enough for you, Alex, in Watford. What do you think the plan is?
We are leaving on the 31st of October with no deal.
So he's lying now.
Dominic Cummings is running the Conservative Party.
Yes.
Dominic Cummings, what did you go to Russia for 3 years for? Can I leave that one with you, James?
Well, you can, but it's a little bit conspiratorial. Do you welcome the idea of crashing out with no deal on October the 31st?
Cummings is running the Conservative Party.
I don't think anyone would dispute that, least of all him. But I just want to know you personally. Do you because a lot of people do. I'm not being glib or facetious. Do you fancy the idea of a no-idea Brexit at the end of next month?
No, I don't.
No, all right.
Boris takes us out on no deal. He's breaking the country, and I'll try to break him.
At the ballot box, I stress. Thank you, Alex. Metropolitan Liberal elite there. 29 minutes after 10 is the time, and that's it. I mean, everyone seems to be more or less in agreement on what the plan is. The only difference is whether you like being lied to by the British Prime Minister or whether you hate being lied to by the British Prime Minister. And that's what I was trying to say during my interminable introduction. It's not being lied to that matters anymore. It's whether or not you like the lie, isn't it? That's really scary, surely. I think, welcome more than almost any other contributor to the programme today, someone who can explain to me, perhaps with reference to history and traditional precedent, why having a Prime Minister being cheered for his lies is not necessarily the terrible state of affairs that my inner voice tells me that it is. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Phone lines are abuzz, but do try and grab one for yourself. What's the plan? How's it going? And if your answer to that question involves enthusiasm for the fact that the Prime Minister is lying to you, talk me through why I shouldn't be as spooked by that reality as I am. Just genuine, a sort of calm down dear moment. Don't worry, James, he has to tell these lies because ... and after that everything will be fine again. Theo Ushwood is here to bring us up to speed with this morning's developments. He wouldn't necessarily have wanted to be in Ireland this morning, would he, Boris Johnson?
He is in Ireland. It's 19 days into that 30-day window that Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, gave Boris Johnson in Berlin last month, yes, to come up with alternative proposals to the backstop. He was with Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, who took a very bullish tone in his speech. I've been listening across the question and answer session. Boris Johnson asked for more detail about what the UK's plan looked like, and he fell back on something that's been well documented from Brexiters within the Conservative Party, a trusted trader scheme, and then a single market for agri-foods covering agriculture and foodstuffs, basically keeping Northern Ireland along the same regulatory alignment as the Republic.
The landing zone is clear to everybody. We need to find a way of ensuring that the UK is not kept locked in the backstop arrangement, so there is a way out for the UK, whilst giving Ireland the assurances that it needs. And I think there are two broad areas, Tommy, where progress can be made, and they are on everybody understands the facilitations that people have been talking about for a long time now, whether it's trusted trader schemes or electronic pre-clearance of goods. There's a lot that can be done there. I think there is another area too, which is the concept of the unity of the island of Ireland for sanitary and phytosanitary purposes. In other words, for agri-foods.
Hang on, because this is fascinating, and again, it gets filed under things I can't believe that I'm going to say out loud. That's pretty close to what the original proposal was. That's pretty close to a border down the Irish Sea.
Yes.
Type proposal.
Just for that sector.
Yes, which is what the European Union wanted.
Yes.
And which we insisted had to be extended
of the DUP.
To the whole of the United Kingdom. So his big plan is a slightly watered-down version of their original offer, which we rejected.
Yes, so anything that isn't agri-foods, you would have...
and they've already said this doesn't butter any parsnips, Irish or English or otherwise.
Yes. So for everything that doesn't cover foodstuffs, animals, anything related to animals, then you would have checks away from the border where lorries registering, or commercial entities registering what they are transporting across the border, and then being subjected to checks at depots away from the border, because of course that, in Boris Johnson's view, upholds the Good Friday Agreement because it puts no infrastructure along the 310-mile border between the Republic of Ireland and
but in the
Northern
Irish government's view.
Well, and then, of course, there's a big question mark about whether Boris Johnson is serious when it comes to doing a deal. That was one of the reasons cited by Amber Rudd when she resigned at the weekend as Work and Pensions Secretary.
See, the chief whip on that WhatsApp group, where some MPs were encouraging the Prime Minister to break the law of the land, insisted that he said everything I've seen of Boris tells me that he is trying really hard to get a deal, and that's the thing now, isn't it?
That's the argument within the Conservative Party.
He simultaneously wants and doesn't want an election, depending on where you sit on this whole debate, and he simultaneously is trying very hard or isn't trying at all to get a deal, depending on where you sit on this. And those two constituencies put very odd people on the same side of the argument, because there's plenty of hard breaksters who think he is. Well, we know that the Daily Mail columnist Richard Littlejohn wrote about how he's lying, and it's brilliant because it's all part of a ruse to accelerate the notion of crashing out without a deal, and yet simultaneously Amber Rudd thinks he's lying when he says, and that for her becomes a resignation issue. It's quite incredible.
So for Amber Rudd and for those who want a deal, they haven't been convinced that Boris Johnson is serious about getting a deal.
And that's good news for ERG-type people who don't want him to be serious about getting a deal, because there is literally no deal that would allow them to get their heads out of their fundaments and actually start speaking English.
So people like Ken Clarke and Nicholas Soames think he's set the bar too high, and that by taking the backstop out, it means that...
Go on then, give us a theory. My callers today are doing what's the plan? What is, and I know you don't like to speculate as much as I do, because you're a little bit more rooted in reporting, but what do you think the plan is? Because I now have the beginnings of an answer to that question. The beginnings, and it's thanks to you and what you've just reminded us of.
I think there is what Number 10 are trying to do, as they are trying to create various scenarios to box in their opponents so that we leave on October the 31st without a deal. They are trying to lay the groundwork for that to happen, and at the moment...
Do you really?
I think it is looking like they are going to be successful.
Gosh.
Because if Boris Johnson refuses to go and to sign an extension to Article 50 until January, then somebody else has to go and do it. Now, in the Supreme Court, Jonathan Sumption has just come out and said that it could be signed by a civil servant on behalf of the UK government to get that extension. The only other person, if it's not going to be a civil servant...
He's bound by law, isn't he, as Prime Minister, to
So what they will...
It's almost like they didn't want Parliament to have control of anything.
So Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, said at the weekend that they're not going to ask for the extension at that summit. But if we get to a stage where we go into the last week of October, Boris Johnson could call an election. He could vote no confidence himself, call an election, because he's not going to sign it. And then we move into a stage where it then becomes a matter of days, where the only other person who could sign it would be Jeremy Corbyn. And is Jeremy Corbyn going to sign an extension to Article 50? And I just question whether...
I've been trying to strip away the complicated analysis. I love this one. This is strong. My mind's much simpler.
So somebody has... The two things about an extension, James, that has to happen. The first is we have to ask for it, and the second thing is the EU have to agree to it. The EU has to agree to it to one side. Yeah. Who is going to go to Brussels and ask for that extension if it isn't Boris Johnson? And let's say for a moment Jonathan Sumption has got it wrong and it isn't going to be the Cabinet Secretary, Sir Mark Sedwill. Is Jeremy Corbyn really going to go to Brussels and ask for that extension, knowing what it could do to the Labour vote in the north of England, the Midlands and Wales? I just question whether that can happen.
It's the John Mann school of the Labour vote in the north and the Midlands and Wales on that. It's not quite as
I know it's not as simple as
humdinger as some people believe, but what about Ireland then? Ireland just gets shafted.
Northern Ireland?
Yeah.
Northern Ireland, for the moment, is irrelevant. And I mean, I don't mean that with disrespect to Northern Ireland.
No, you don't, but in the context of your plan, what you're describing... Because for me, the only thing I can see making sense would be to throw the DUP under the bus.
The DUP can be thrown under the bus now.
After an election?
But Boris Johnson is minus... Well, it can be. Boris Johnson is minus 45.
So he's given up on electoral arithmetic, hasn't he? The DUP have become irrelevant.
It's minus 45. The only question is when his confidence is tested in the House of Commons. That's the only, he doesn't have the confidence in the House of Commons. Speaking of which, just needs the test.
Briefly, what happens today in the Commons, precisely?
So, later on today afternoon, once various debate on the Northern Ireland update on the power sharing agreement, we're going to have a second vote under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act for a general election, which requires a vote of 434.
So who's brought that, then?
That's brought by the government.
But they already had a vote. They just having more and more votes because they didn't like the result.
So then that gives them an excuse to send chicken to various journalists with Jeremy Corbyn's.
I read about that on Friday. Thought I was tripping. What else? Anything else?
That's it for the moment.
Are we done?
If there are any more updates, I'll...
I can't wait. It's almost like a revolving door on the studio at the moment. What's the plan? Theo's is more complicated than mine. Mine just involves going back to that... Northern Ireland essentially ceasing to exist as a separate entity from the Republic of Ireland in all but name. And we need to remind ourselves that the speeches today, the joint press conference between Boris Johnson and Leo Varadkar, essentially saw Boris Johnson suggest that his plan is a watered-down version of the proposal that the European Union originally made to us and which we rejected because it was confined to the island of Ireland and didn't extend to the whole of the United Kingdom. You could not make this up. Sam's in Malaga. Sam, what's the plan? What's the plan, Sam?
There is no plan for Boris specifically. He's just kind of bumbling along. But I think the EU have a very clear plan, a very strategic plan.
Really?
And I think it will work. Yeah.
Go on.
Right. You have to... Okay, the EU's strategic objective is to actually get this withdrawal agreement through because it places the UK and the EU as far apart as possible. Everything is settled. There's no issues outstanding. So if the UK afterwards decides to stay kind of a social democratic European country, then we can negotiate a very close relationship. If it kind of goes down a sort of dystopian, mercantile, Singapore, American free market, laissez-faire, caveat emptor economy, then they can just go, you know what, you guys stay over there by yourself and we'll just stay over here and we'll have nothing to do with you.
So if we go full Tufton Street, they can wash their hands of us.
Exactly. And there's no outstanding issues, there's no negotiations ongoing. The only
I'm
way
just going to pause you briefly to apologise to my regular listeners. Every single analysis so far has been better than mine. So I just want to get that apology front and centre before we carry on. Back to Sam.
Right. So the second thing is they know clearly to get any prime minister to get this withdrawal through, they need a British government that has a huge majority.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. 17th of 18th, what has Boris campaigned for when he said, we'll have a standstill agreement? Okay, all right, then, Boris, you can have a standstill agreement for a year. On the 31st, you're out. There's no withdrawal agreement. On the standstill agreement for a year...
Just remind us exactly what the standstill agreement is and why you're so confident it would be easily introduced.
Well, it's basically the transition agreement. It's basically the UK will still respect the laws and pay in, and nothing changes, but you are out.
Do you think that'll wash with the how can one put this politely, the charlatans, spivs and liars on the fringes won't be going along with that, will they?
Well, I think Boris can sell it on the grounds of, look, no withdrawal agreement, no backstop, no this, everything. We're going to negotiate in this year, which is basically what he campaigned on, by the way. It's basically GATT 24 without being GATT 24. And the EU can quite happily say to him, Boris, we'll start negotiations on the 2nd of November. We understand on the 1st of November you'll all have a bit of a hangover from celebrating leaving our undemocratic club. So have a nice English fry up on the 1st, and then on the 2nd we start negotiating. Now, first of all, that achieves two things. It narrows options down for the UK. Remain is no longer an option. Revoke is no longer an option.
That's the bit that began me quibbling internally, was the idea that you think our former partners in the EU have given up on us coming to our senses sufficiently to stay in. I think you're probably
absolutely
right, yes. You're closer to the action than I am in sunny Malaga.
It also narrows down the option of,
if the UK decides to stay in and be belligerent, because the EU wants people, shall we say, inside the tent urinating outside the tent, as opposed to Boris is now threatening to be inside the tent defecating in the tent.
Oh, all right.
Yes. So it closes down that option. Now you have a whole year to negotiate and come up with whatever.
Sure, we get
and on
the
the 2nd of
standstill
November.
But then don't we just postpone it? Because what happens at the end of that year if nothing's moved and nothing's changed?
Well, it's not just that, but on the 2nd of November, the British negotiator sits down and the EU goes, right, citizens' rights, Irish backstop, Irish-only backstop, and the money. No trade talks until this is sorted. In 10 months' time, still nothing is resolved. It also frees the EU's hands with regards to dealing with us, because currently the EU's hands are restricted because we're a member state in how nice or how hard they can be with us. It's, if you may use the carrot and stick analogy, because we're a member state, they're not allowed to use the stick.
It's mostly carrot.
Here's the carrot on the table.
I'd go a little further than that, and I'd say a lot of their motivation thus far has been built upon an inability to quite believe that we're doing what we're doing, or to believe that we would be doing what we're doing if we fully understood what we are doing. But of course, understanding and thinking and detail and actually telling us what the plan is, all of those are desperately unfashionable in Brexit Britain. What do we want? Whatever our lords and masters tell us we want. When do we want it? Straight after the day after the referendum result came in. Thank you, Sam. I'll pick over the bones of that as we move forward. But as Sam bids farewell, or adios, of course, it frees up a phone line for you. If you want to tell me what you think the plan is, how you think it's going, because Sam kind of opted out of that in the sense that Boris Johnson doesn't really have a plan, he thinks. I'm looking for Boris Johnson, or more pertinently, of course, Dominic Cummings' plan. What do you think it is? How's it going? And if it involves you being enthusiastic about the Prime Minister lying to the country, then in all seriousness and in good faith, just sort of talk me through why that's not as big a bad thing as my instincts and understanding tells me that it is. It's 10:48. It was an interesting week last week. I did apologise to you repeatedly for enjoying it so much. The madness of British politics when you're paid to report upon it is, it's a double-edged sword. And one of those edges is rather nice. I don't feel the same today. Maybe I will as the week continues, because I hate confusion. I hate ignorance. I hate not knowing. Or not understanding what people are up to. I think that's the problem. Usually, by reading and studying and thinking, you can at least come to a fairly cogent conclusion. I mean, of course, by not reading and not thinking and not studying, you can come to a much, much, much more passionate conclusion. That's the old W.B. Yeats line, isn't it? About the worst are full of certainty. No, what is it? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Passionate intensity and all that malarkey. But I can't make head nor tail of what's going on now. I read articles at the weekend that said Dominic Cummings hasn't even started yet. This is all part of the plan. And things are now so mad that you think, well, maybe it is. And then, you know what happens to me then, don't you? When I start thinking, well, maybe there is a plan, we just can't see what it is. Yeah. It's the ballad of the flesh-coloured body stocking all over again, isn't it? It's what I spent much of Theresa May's premiership occasionally thinking. It was, well, I mean, the Emperor looks stark rollock naked to me. But so many people are still cheering his magnificent robes, or insisting that if we just sort of change our position in the crowd slightly, we'll be able to see that these robes are magnificent. He's not naked at all. Maybe he was wearing a flesh-coloured body stocking all along. And I'm doing it again now. Except that, you know, Dominic Cummings is a very different beast from Theresa May. And possibly, given his reputation, which is all I really have to go on, maybe he has got a box full of flesh-coloured body stockings. If not, what? What's the plan? 0345 6060 973. Clive's in Wood Green. Clive, what do you think? What's the plan?
Hi, James. Well, it's basically a continuation of what Theo Osherwood was talking about earlier, that Boris will refuse to go to Brussels and sign and do everything. And someone else, for example, there'll be a government of national unity led by...
Could that happen today? Corbyn. Could that begin to happen today? Or not?
That's a question for Theo, not for me.
Is it? I'll ask him.
But I think, and then Jeremy Corbyn will be seen, especially in the right-wing press, that he'll be the Neville Chamberlain appeasement figure, 1938 Munich Agreement.
So they're trying to set Corbyn up for that, which is, you're quite right, that is a sort of an evolution of what hadn't even crossed my mind.
Yes, and then, but, I mean, Boris will, of course, resign as Prime Minister, but not resign as the leader of the Conservative Party, so he'll go into leader of the opposition. And
but this is still case 2, isn't it? Case 1 is they really do want a general election before October the 31st.
That's my point. The point is that he'll be in opposition, and Boris Johnson, because the way he is, he doesn't do detail, he doesn't do
he can be the heckler
really,
again.
Apart from he's more suited to be leader of opposition than actually being in power. So when the moment for the general election comes, however that may come about, Boris Johnson will be seen as the saviour of Brexit because he hasn't crossed any of his red lines.
So him and Farage will be squabbling over heckling rights, essentially.
Yes, and he'll be dying the ditch, and he says I'm the Boadicea. You can see all the all the things he'll come up with, the resistance, the Dad's Army kind of thing, and he'll be seen, and then he'll romp home, maybe in the election because he's seen as the saviour of Brexit and the saviour of Britain, and Jeremy Corbyn and the other people will be seen as the people who sold the soul of Britain and Brexit.
Will it work?
It's a far effect, but I mean there is of course a spanner in every plan, and the spanner in the plan is that the EU will say 3 months. They might say 2 years. You don't know. From the EU side of things, they might say 3 months. What's the point of kicking the can down the road for 3 months when you can do it for 2 or 3 years? And then we go to the question of staying as we are now. But then again, you'll have the power vacuum in the central British government. Who's going to be in charge? And then if you get the Conservatives and Boris Johnson back in charge, then we're back to square one. We'll be back to no deal again.
And that picture painted by the previous caller of that. The UK with which the EU will not want much to do, Hove's slightly closer interview, that we could end up in that ludicrous, what they call the Singapore-style low-tax, low-regulation economy, which is appalling for everyone except investors in whatever industry we have left.
So,
that
basically,
could happen by accident.
I think Dominic Cumming would say, he's prepared to lose the next 2 or 3 battles, but he'll win the war. I think I've got it. I'm not going to lie. I'm sort of pedalling hard to keep up with my contributors this morning. But there is some light of comprehension at the end of the tunnel. And my thanks also to Paul for reminding me of that poem I keep misquoting or referring to erroneously. The best lack all conviction, that's it, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. It took me years to understand that line. As a teenager, it doesn't work. As an adolescent, the best lack all conviction. You're like, no, the best are the ones that are most passionately persuaded of their position. But old Yeats knew what he was talking about. It's because he spent time in Chiswick as a youngster. You see, there's something in the water. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. What have we got? Passionate intensity coming out of our ears in this country at the moment. Where's it going to lead us? God only knows. But I tell you what, the best do indeed lack all conviction. I'm going to carry on with your calls on this. My thanks to Clive, who I think was making his debut. After Clive, it could, of course, be you. But you need to grab the phone line that he's just vacated. Other stories that have tickled me. I'll give you some more details on that grab a bag campaign that police across the country have encouraged members of the public to undertake. Goodness knows what's going on, but I don't think it behoves us to mock and belittle anything that's designed to equip people with what they might need in an emergency. I guess it's only minds like ours that go, why are they warning us now about the possibility of an emergency so acute that we need a rucksack full of essentials packed by the door at all times? Why are they doing that now? Haven't they heard? It's sunlit uplands. They've got a plan, but they can't tell you what it is. Or indeed anyone. They can't tell anyone what it is. The bones of the plan, as described by Boris Johnson, look very like a watered-down version of the European Union's original offer to us, which we rejected on the grounds that it confined the status quo to Northern Ireland and not the whole of the United Kingdom, something that would cause great uproar among Scottish voters, of course, who wanted to remain in the European Union. To be told that actually Northern Ireland can and you can't would be a very difficult project to sell.
But that's where we are. We've got a Prime Minister who wants an election but doesn't want an election, a plan that exists but doesn't exist, and a Parliament that has no control over our law but also has too much control over our laws. And that's why God only knows how it's all going to end now. That's what I haven't got it right yet. I'll get it right by the end of the week. This idea of two different versions of events being both alive. You know, they should, historically, traditionally, ideally, intellectually, they would cancel each other out. Boris Johnson either wants an election or he doesn't want an election, right? There is either a plan or there is not a plan, right? Either they are trying very hard to negotiate a plan or they are not trying very hard to negotiate a plan. But I think I could lick my finger and stick it in the air and find equal support on the wins for all of those positions. And the weirdest thing now is that it doesn't break down according to Leave-Remain divisions. Everything has done for 3 years, it feels. But if I say to you, he's not really negotiating, the plan is to crash out with a no-idea Brexit and try to blame it on someone else in the hope that enough of the electorate will fall for it, that is the view of many members of the ERG as well. They might not go along with the pretending element of it, but they've made it pretty clear that they don't want any deal at all. Even the ones that voted for the last deal now don't want any deal, let alone the last deal that they voted for. So it doesn't break down on Leave and Remain. Amber Rudd's view of whether or not Boris Johnson is actually having any negotiations is the same as the hardcore Brexiters in her own party who want to crash out with a no-idea Brexit. They both think he's not really negotiating at all. The only difference is Amber Rudd understands what that means and is justifiably terrified by it, and the people cheering it along have no idea what it means, and are all doing what I think is known in the trade as a Dories, which is almost celebrating a failure to understand things and cheering along anything that allows that postponement of reality to be undertaken. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. What's going on? What's the plan? 0345 6060 973. I am Incorrigible, who is one of my favourite correspondents, as you may know. He writes, Cummings and Johnson had a plan. It was to prorogue Parliament and then crash out of the EU on the 31st of October. That was their backstop. There was no other plan. Everything that happens now is them reacting to events and making it up on the hoof. It's a view, but it is, of course, a view that rejects rather powerfully the perception or the portrayal of Dominic Cummings as some sort of genius. I think the problem's much simpler, actually. I think that when you put a massive lie on the side of a bus or on election leaflets or in the mouths of politicians, if it's a lie that depends upon the future, then you'll get away with it, you know. So I don't mean forecasts that turned out not to be entirely accurate, or perhaps in the case of Mark Carney, predictions and forecasts that he worked his fingers to the bone to stop coming true, and then when they don't come true, he gets a kicking from people like Jacob Rees-Mogg. Yeah, I mean, if you can make sense of that, you're a better man than me. But fibs and embellishments and lies that you can actually check out fairly quickly are very different. So, for example, saying we've got a plan or saying that we're negotiating, it's not the same as saying we can't control our laws or there'll be 350 million quid for the NHS. Most of us can come to a fairly, quotes, informed, end quotes, conclusion about whether or not there's actually any negotiation worth the name going on. Most of us can, and people like Amber Rudd have come to the same conclusion as many hard-right individuals, and that conclusion is there isn't anything. The only difference is that idiots cheer the fact that he's lying and patriots despair at the thought of a British Prime Minister lying to the British people. But that seems to me to be the miscalculation. The idea that a lie that you can check out could work in the same way that the referendum lies worked. Most obviously the lie on the side of a bus. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, imagine if Dominic Cummings drove out of Downing Street today in an enormous luxury bus with "We got a deal." No, it needs to be more than that. "We got a great deal" written on the side of the bus, okay? we got a brilliant deal. It's written on the same bus. You can just see, if you look really closely, give it a bit of a rub, you can see the old 350 million quid just underneath the paintwork. But the new bus says, we got a brilliant deal. Now, you can check that, right? They didn't. But it's no less true than the 350 million claim that was on the old bus. So they haven't quite got the tactics. You can't employ the tactics you used to win the referendum to gull the British public into believing that you're doing the opposite of what you're actually doing. But they don't need, of course, to gull all of us. They just need to gull enough of us. So the bus that says we got... I mean, genuinely, I know it's all a bit Trumpian, but that's the path that we're flirting with now. How unlikely do you think it is? If I announced now that Dominic Cummings has claimed they've got a brilliant deal, the EU don't know anything about it, the British Parliament doesn't know anything about it, nobody knows anything about it except Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, who claim that they've got a brilliant deal and everything's going to be fine. Hand on heart, do you think I could get calls from people supporting that deal? People not expecting me to ask a second or third question along the lines of, what's your favourite bit of it? Or could you just name one element? Or could you just tell me what's it? I'm not being, I don't think, silly. I reckon I could get those calls. I've taken calls off people who deny the evidence of their own eyes. I've taken calls off people who tell me with a straight face that they like being lied to. If they announce now, we've got a brilliant deal, but we can't tell you what it is yet because, fish. I reckon you could... I don't think it would be that hard to fill up the switchboard with people who would absolutely persuade themselves in a nanosecond that it must be true. It's on the side of a bus, for God's sake. It must be true. And that seems to be where we are. Maybe I'm wrong. If so, tell me how. Edward's in Guildford. Edward, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Edward.
Second-time caller. Before I give you my predicament, can I tell you what you told me 8 months ago on the first time I called you? Add some context.
Okay.
I told you I was an EU national who moved to the UK 11 years ago, yes. And I was contemplating whether to move to Italy or to the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And I told you that the decision to come to the United Kingdom partly was because we had political stability.
I remember.
And you turned around and you said, oh, come on, look at it, there's a fascist in the Italian government. Can't you see that?
Yes.
I'd just like you to think of where we stand today.
Well, I was right. I mean, but the idea that there was therefore an ocean of clear blue political water between a government with a fascist in it and our government, you're suggesting very politely, perhaps needs to be reviewed.
Yeah. I remind you, the fascist is no longer in the government.
No, I know, but he was then.
Okay, so...
just give me something. Give me something, Edward.
Fair enough. So, my predicaments are going to be a lot more dire and probably rather cynical. I think we're in Plan B. I think we're in Cummings' Plan B. Plan A was to tempt Jeremy Corbyn into an election. Now he probably doesn't have that, so he's going into Plan B. And what I think Plan B is the complete Trumpification of British politics. And you asked for some historical context, yes. So I'm going to try and give it to you. Trump election, okay? You had four main characters in this play. You had Donald Trump, you had Steve Bannon, you had Hillary Clinton, and you had Bernie Sanders, right? We have now the equivalent of these four in British politics. Trump is, of course, Boris. Steve Bannon is, of course, Dominic Cummings. Hillary is... Do you want to take a guess who Hillary would be?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. And Bernie Sanders is effectively SNP Lib Dem, right? The good guys, but they can't be elected.
You might swap Hillary and Bernie round, but your point stands.
No, the point... what I think he's doing is turning politics into the absurd. I mean, seriously, the Prime Minister has become completely absurd. I mean, I can't even believe it. I've been in this country 11 years and it's become completely absurd. But absurdity plays into Cummings' handbook because the more absurd he can make him be, the more he pulls in the kind of people who are calling LBC yesterday evening saying, of course he can break the law as long as we can get whatever we want.
Yes.
So I think it's strategic to actually turn this into what I want to call destructive ambiguity.
Here you go. Here's a text. You're the idiot, pal. Obviously, "your" is spelt wrong. We understand leaving without a deal. The problem is brain-dead idiots like you that cannot understand we want our country back and not ruled by an unelected bunch of parasites in Brussels. That mindset there is going to be cheering the breaking of the law. They're going to love being lied to. There is no nutcracker strong enough to crack that particular nut, is there?
James, would you agree with me that this comes out of the Bannon playbook?
Do you know, I'm always slightly wary of talking about Bannon and to a lesser extent Cummings, because I think Cummings has still got some cards that haven't been turned over.
Yeah, Cummings has one big advantage over Bannon.
Go on.
Right? Which is the electoral system.
Yes.
Bannon knew he had to win what was at least close to 50%.
Yes, but in terms of strategy and tactics, all Bannon did was find a candidate who was prepared to serve red meat to racists. I mean, there's no complicated theory here or sort of Machiavellian master plan. All he did was find a candidate that would say vile things about even dead soldiers if their parents were Muslims. They say vile things about everyone from Mexico, everyone from Islamic countries. He says vile things about us, about London, where we live. Apparently it's a hellhole and worse than Detroit or New York. I mean, he just found a candidate who would pander to the basest instincts that humanity has ever managed to foment. So he's not really a genius, Edward, is he?
No, I don't, but interestingly, there are other parallels you may want to think of.
Yes.
So Mexico is actually Northern Ireland. Fake news is alternative arrangements. The Tea Party is the ERG.
Yeah, I'll give you the last one. I'll give you the last one.
And the Mexican wall.
Go on.
Is the backstop.
The Mexican wall is the Mexican wall is the solution to the backstop. The Mexican wall is the solution to the backstop.
But everybody knew it was observed anyway.
Well, we keep saying everybody. And like you, Edward, I don't know how to write the next chapter of this saga, because if we carry on saying everybody, you ignore the people like the ones who can't spell "your," but are absolutely adamant that you're an idiot. They are real people, real voters. It's astonishing to see a Prime Minister apparently prioritising them over Sir Nicholas Soames, but, lots of astonishing things going on at the moment, where we are wondering what you might think the plan is at the moment, the plan that Dominic Cummings is enacting via the vessel that is our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. I don't know how illustrative or interesting it is that the plans are as disparate almost as the callers today. What seems fairly clear. Does anyone actually believe? I mean, I know James Cleverly does. And the chief whip there was a WhatsApp group, it was reported this morning, where some Tory MPs were expressing great enthusiasm for the idea of the Prime Minister breaking the law. And the chief whip insisted the language was very interesting. I should dig it out for you and double-check the language. I might be over-analysing it. But the chief whip appeared to be persuaded that Boris Johnson is trying very, very hard to negotiate a deal with the European Union. But the problem with that, whether you're the chief whip or James Cleverly, is the European Union say they're not. I mean, almost everyone I've seen quoted or reported on this from the other side of the argument is saying, well, no, they haven't come to us. And then when you ask them what the plan actually is, they say, well, we can't tell anyone. Even the people we're negotiating with. This was pretty much Dominic Raab's position yesterday on the Sophie Ridge programme. Well, we can't tell them what our negotiating position is because it might leak and get criticised. So we are in a negotiation, but we can't tell you what the plan is, and we can't tell the people that we're negotiating with what the plan is either. And then that odd observation that most people seem to not believe that we're negotiating. The only question is whether you cheer that lie or despair at it. That doesn't even break down across Leave, Remain or Labour-Tory lines. Because plenty of people who voted for the withdrawal agreement, in many cases 3 times, are now being told that they're not Brexity enough by people who voted both for and against it. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. Richard Bennion is the Conservative MP for Newbury. At least for now he is, because he's just announced that he won't be standing at the next general election. I've lost count, I'm afraid, of how many politicians now fall into this category. But I've checked with Richard, and he doesn't mind me saying that I met him a couple of months ago. We sat next to each other at a dinner, and I filed him under one of the people that made me a little bit more optimistic about the possibility of this unholy mess unravelling in a way that wouldn't be as problematical as perhaps some of us imagine in our darkest moments. So, Richard, this isn't great news from any perspective. Is this a sign that you've run out of patience and hope, or am I reading too much into your decision?
Morning, James. Well, no, actually, a lot of optimism in the Bennion family, actually. they're rather pleased.
I'm sure.
Well, no, these things are always about as much about personal issues as they are about the wider things. And I've been active in politics for 30 years. It took me 11 years to win my seat, and I've held it and built up a good majority over 4 elections. And I've got to make a decision about whether I've got the energy it takes to go at full speed for another 5 years after the election. And I naively thought that this Parliament could run till 2022, but of course it's not going to. And then, of course, there is current events which. I've lost the whip, so I think there's a good chance I'll get it restored. But it's not great for my association because they don't know whether they're going to have to find somebody else or whether they're going to have me. And I just sort of think for everyone's benefit, it's probably best to draw stumps.
You spare, obviously, embarrassment and possibly worse for the association. But what about the constituents? I mean, who? Because among all of you who have had the whip withdrawn, quite a few planning not to fight at the next election. We'll never know whether you would have done that if events had unfolded differently. But people who are worried about the course that the government is taking probably look more to people who are part of the governing party than they do to the opposition at the moment. And you're quitting the field in droves.
I understand that, and I've tortured myself over this decision. And not helped by the fact that I can't walk down the street without people crossing the road to say nice things to me, friends and foe.
Yes.
Those things can turn your head. But I desperately hope that what the Prime Minister told us last Tuesday when we went to see him in number 10 is true, that he really wants a deal. And we know that he's off to see the Taoiseach, and we know that stuff is happening, and I get telephone calls, all day from colleagues in government saying, hang in there, there is real work being done. But I'm dreadfully afraid, James, that if we get to a point where there is no alternative but no deal.
Yes.
But the tunnel I'm looking down is not perhaps initially, and it's not ever in a way that's going to affect people like you or me, but people on fixed incomes, people on low incomes who work for businesses with complex supply chains. And, I just feel they will be hurt, really badly hurt by no deal. I feel, that perhaps I am leaving the field of battle, but I'm not doing it without a fight. And I've put my career on the line to try and, make a stand on this. And maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't. But I think we've got to focus on that over the next few days.
And I sense in the background of your words, I hear perhaps a sort of I don't know what else I could do. I don't know what else I could have done than what I've done thus far. And
well, there are some people like half the cabinet who don't mind rebelling at all. Some of them have rebelled over 100 times.
Yes.
Some of us, and Jeremy Corbyn, I think over 500 times rebelled against his party whip. Some of us find it tortuous doing it. I've done it 3 times, I think, and this one was obviously by far the biggest because it involved a risk to obviously to losing the whip. And I'm jolly jealous of people for whom it is the work of a moment just to skip through the other lobby. For me, I really went through the dark night of the soul on this one and felt I'd done the right thing and will continue to try and do the right thing.
I apologise for asking this question because you clearly have tortured yourself in arriving at this conclusion. But when you were being assured both by the Prime Minister in person and subsequently presumably by the Chief Whip and various other emissaries and telephone calls, did you uncover a scintilla of evidence that these negotiations are underway, and more pertinently that the Prime Minister's claim that he desperately wants the deal he not long ago described as a 1,000,000 to 1 chance, in good faith? I'm asking you, do you believe him, Richard Benyon?
But David Cross, the chief negotiator, was at the meeting and explained a bit about what's happening, and I think quite a lot more has happened since that meeting. But I'm the simple. So I looked at the 30-day window that Chancellor Merkel had mentioned, and now I was 11 or 12 days into those 30 days, and no message, no clear indication had been given to Europe, what to the EU, what was being offered, what was being talked of being offered seemed an incredibly, almost impossibly high bar. And
yes,
a combination of that and a number of other factors just pushed me over the line. But I'm ready to come back if I can be convinced.
There you go. Richard Bennion, still MP for Newbury, no longer, of course, a holder of the Conservative whip, and that final comment there notwithstanding, determined or decided that he will not be fighting the next general election. It's coming up to 11:30, and the question remains, what is the plan? And if there isn't one, why are you cool with that? 0345 60 60 973. It's quite strange for me, as I mentioned to you. I try to tell you everything. I don't like the idea of this job somehow involving, the breaking of bread and schmoozing and drinking with people in the public eye, and then me not telling you about it. So I always try and tell you. I did allude to sitting next to Richard Bennion at a dinner. It was a dinner in support of the Magnitsky Act and the Magnitsky sanctions. So sort of not about domestic politics. But I told you, I keep bumping into conservative politicians who sort of make even more of a mockery of the tribalism of modern Britain, modern British politics. The idea that everybody's 100% signed up to one team or the other. Almost everybody impressive I meet would run a million miles from the notion that we should be 100% signed. That's what culture wars are created to engender. And the problem with culture wars is that only one side ever seems to be fighting. Just a curious collection of circumstances. As ever, I'm trying to find things upon which we can all agree. I can't even do that. Because some people apparently do think there's a plan or do think that there is a negotiation underway. I can't quite see it myself, but that doesn't mean there isn't. It's got to be relevant that none of the people on the other side of the negotiation in the European Union are aware of these new proposals or of these negotiations ongoing. I'm had so many texts coming in, I lose track of them, but there was one a moment ago suggesting that because Boris Johnson is in Dublin, it's wrong of me to suggest that they're not negotiating. I can see why you thought that, and I'm sure your choice of language was a reflection of having a poor breakfast rather than any deeper personality traits. But the point is, even if they were negotiating, I mean, you don't negotiate with Leo Varadkar on this, not in the first instance, or even if you do, every single thing has to be agreed by every single European Union country. They all have the power to veto the request, for example, for an extension. They would all have to agree to any changes to the withdrawal agreement, every single one of them. That's what pooling sovereignty means. And if only we'd called it pooling sovereignty for the last 30 years instead of the ludicrous lie surrendering sovereignty, then arguably none of this unholy mess would ever have happened. So what do you think the plan is? And how is it going? 11:36 is the time. Brendan is in Hartlepool in County Durham. Brendan, what's the plan and how's it going?
Well, could I start off, James, by telling you I know how to spell your and I know where the apostrophe goes.
Well done.
We'll start from that, shall we? I am pretty sure that Boris has a plan, and I have no desire to know what it is, because if he starts telling people the plan, he lets the other side know what the plan is. Now, you were saying that is a state of chaos.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that he's got enough advisors. Even Mr. Cummings is probably a cleverer man than I am, and he will know how to spell your with the apostrophe. So can we just let them get on with it? And then if it doesn't turn out that he was lying to us, Kel's surprise, which politician doesn't lie to the electorate? Could you name me one?
Well, I could name you several, I suppose.
Go on, then. Who?
Well, a politician who doesn't lie to... Richard Bennion. Richard Bennion, who I just spoke to. What lie has he told?
I don't know. I don't know him.
Well, then what a stupid question, then.
No, it isn't.
Of course it is.
He doesn't lie?
How do you know he does?
I
literally just chose the last one I spoke to. You're the one that's come on air with an accusation. You said they all lie, so I said prove it.
All right. In my experience, politicians lie.
Well done. Yeah, but you just came on air and said they all do. I said prove it, and you folded like a cheap suit.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, I didn't.
That's all right. It didn't go well. There's no reason. There's no
reason.
reason why it should have done. I mean, I could now name any MP at all and say to you, prove that they've lied, and it would happen again and again and again and again. So it's a ludicrous argument to say I don't mind being lied to by this one because they all lie. What an absolute joke, Brendan. This was your big opportunity with your big apostrophe arguments. This could have gone so much better for you.
Very well done, James. Excellent.
Yes, I know. Unfortunately, it takes about the effort of flicking a fly. Anyway, let's get back to reality. You don't know what the plan is. You don't need to know what it is.
Sorry. I don't feel. All right, let's put it differently.
Yeah.
I don't feel I need to know what the plan is.
But you're confident there is one.
Well, no. Can you let me finish? I have to assume that there is a plan.
Why?
Otherwise, what's the point of all this?
Well, now we're on the same page. What is the point of all this if there isn't a plan?
Yeah, but you don't want us to leave. I do. So I'm assuming there is a plan behind what Boris is doing to leave. You're assuming there isn't a plan because you don't want to leave.
No, I'm honestly not. I think there is a plan. I just can't work out what it is. So we're on the same page.
Okay, right. So is it?
But you don't care.
Is it? No, I do.
About the fact that you don't know what it is and you can't work out what it is, you don't care because, as you've said yourself, that there's some prize at the end of the rainbow that you still think is attractive, even though if I asked you to tell me why, you
wouldn't. The unicorn is that?
No, it's pots of gold at the end of the rainbow, Brendan. Come on, you're getting your myths mixed up.
Unicorn is the
So you don't know what the plan is. You don't care what the plan is. You're convinced it's a good plan, and if it isn't a good plan, then all politicians are liars.
Not really, but if you want to go that way, you can.
Well, no, correct me, because I don't want to misrepresent you. That's what I've heard in the course of this conversation.
All right, I apologise for calling all politicians liars. Some of them might not be, okay? Mr. Benyon isn't a liar, let's put it that way.
I don't know, he might be, but I'm not coming on the radio claiming that he is.
Okay, all right.
Yeah?
Would you say Jeremy's lied to us ever?
Yes, I would.
Would you say Tony Blair's lied to us forever?
Lying's strong, but he certainly seems to have misrepresented the actuality. Okay. But you've ducked away. You've ducked away from what we're talking about. You don't care. You don't know what the plan is. You don't care. And if it turns out, the problem is, for me, after three and a bit years.
Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
Why are we where we are? Do you think?
Do you want me to how I think where we are?
I think I do, Bob. Brendan, sorry.
Sorry, all right. This is what my honest belief is.
Yeah.
I think that the 3.5 years we've had were wasted because our negotiations were carried out by somebody who didn't want to leave.
Right.
Seriously.
Okay.
Mrs. May didn't want to leave. Ollie Robbins didn't want to leave. They're the ones that went and negotiated.
Why do you think they didn't want to leave?
Because they think that it was the wrong decision.
But that's not an answer to my question. I'm looking for their reasoning, not their conclusion. Why do you think?
No, Theresa voted to remain. I presume Ollie voted to remain. So from the off, they didn't want to leave.
Just why?
So why? Because I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they get from the EU, if anything.
When Boris Johnson, you think there might be some sort of kickback or bribe involved?
No, not bribes. No, I think they must like the idea of being on the world stage with another 27 leaders, and it's all.
What's wrong with the world stage?
No, there isn't anything wrong with it. That's what.
What's wrong with wanting to be on it then?
There isn't anything wrong with that. There's nothing. That's what they want to do. Whereas other people who voted leave weren't bothered about being on the world stage with Mr. Macron and Mrs. Merkel and Radke.
No.
You know, and also I suppose it throws back.
So if there's a Remainer in Downing Street, it's all going badly because they're a Remainer. And if there's a Leaver in Downing Street, it's all going badly because they're just not telling us what the plan is yet.
I don't. Well, you keep going about the plan.
Well, that is the whole purpose of today's programme, Brendan. You rang it. I hope you haven't called in by accident, although I'm beginning to wonder.
Do we need to know what the plan is? I mean,
that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying it's not going terribly well this week, is it? He's got, his own brother has resigned. So we can agree on that. It's not going brilliantly well.
No, it isn't.
Which suggests that the plan probably isn't going according to plan, but you don't care about that because we've got a Leaver in Downing Street. If it was a Remainer, this would be evidence of deliberate sabotage?
Well, there is that way of looking at it, I suppose.
But I'm not. I'm trying to work out your position, Brendan. So you're saying if it was a Remainer in Downing Street and it all went badly, that would be deliberate self-sabotage. If it's a Leaver in Downing Street and it's all going badly, I can't finish the sentence, mate. I know you don't care.
That means the other side have outmanoeuvred him in their discussions, do you think? Do you think that would be a way of getting around it?
Well, the other side haven't changed their position in 3 years. So how can you get outmanoeuvred by a 3-year-old Gambit? Unless you're a clown.
Well, he's that's what Boris is, yeah.
No, it's not a rhetorical question. I mean, unless you're a clown, I know that answer to the question, but you clearly don't think he is because he's got a plan. You just don't want to know what it is yet. So if you can be outmanoeuvred by a 3-year-old negotiating position, how would you put a positive gloss on that? Yeah.
Right. Well, then I'd go back to them and say, look, the plan that our government agreed with you, the withdrawal agreement, has been knocked back 3 times by the whole of Parliament. That's the Leavers and the Remainers.
But they know that already.
Yeah. So why are they sticking with it?
Well, because they prioritise their own members ahead of soon-to-be ex-members, Brendan.
But it's not going to get through Parliament, is it?
Yes, but
it's not going
that's not their problem.
Yes. So, all right then. Are the Germans bothered if we leave with a no deal?
They'd much rather we didn't, but they're not going to compromise the integrity of the indivisible 4 freedoms to prevent it from happening, which is the position they've had for over 3... In fact, they had that even before the referendum. And you're suggesting that Boris Johnson has been outmanoeuvred by something that's been clear for 20 years.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't. I hope I didn't come across. I don't think he's been outmanoeuvred. I just think.
So why is it all going so wrong then?
Because Parliament has really put their oar in it.
So Joe Johnson has resigned from his own brother's government because Parliament has put their oar in it.
Yeah, of course. All right then, let's put it this way: if the Tory party had a 200-seat majority, do you think we'd be where we are now?
But you keep doing this. You keep answering my questions with complete non sequiturs. I mean, the question is, why is it all going so badly? Your answer was because Parliament have put their oar in. So when you voted to leave the European Union, you were voting for the British Parliament to have less power than it does. Did you realise that at the time?
No, I didn't vote for that at all.
Oh, well, in that case, absolutely nothing you've just said makes sense. What's the plan? How's it going? Where does it end? Every answer, every call are different. These are my favourite days in some ways at work because, you know, there's no hierarchy. Everybody's theory on what's going on is the same. But, of course, some theories are slightly more dispiriting than others. Like, for example, I don't care what the plan is, but I love Boris Johnson. 11:49 is the time. Adam is in Nottingham. Adam, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Sorry, I'm feeling very, very nervous.
It's only me. It's all right. I've got it out of my system with the last fella.
No problem. And you know, it's been good to hear what you've been saying over the last 18 months. So just to sort of answer your question, really, I do have a belief. Sorry, it's not a fact.
Yeah.
But my belief is really that there is a plan, and that plan is to try and get a 4th reading of the withdrawal agreement or May's deal through Parliament between the period of 19th of October and the 31st. And the belief for that is really, really when we sort of look at little bits of information which are out there. Bercow did actually say for quite a while that there wasn't going to be a 4th reading unless there were some material differences in the actual withdrawal.
Or a new Parliament.
Absolutely.
Yes, you're quite right.
But what you've actually mentioned here before is, and you've mentioned it earlier, is that actually what Boris Johnson is negotiating is really nothing materially different in terms of the border down the Northern Irish border.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to sort of say is his tactic is really to scare I think it's 270 MPs out of the 344 who last voted against the withdrawal agreement. Why I'm saying 270 is you've got 70-odd members of the ERG who aren't going to be voting for it.
But the problem here is, I like it up until the point where we apply it to what's happened in the last week, because the ones he's losing are the ones that perhaps would have been most minded to vote for a resurrected withdrawal agreement, including his own brother. The ones that he seems to be straining to keep sweet are the ones who've stated, and look at his cabinet, Adam, as well. It's full of these are the hardcore headbangers who every time they get given an inch, demand another 74 miles. And I can't quite see how... And then you've got Farage belching in the wings about how if we all just, buy another union flag, we can have our unicorns by Christmas. How's he going to fend off that threat by getting the withdrawal agreement through Parliament?
Okay, just to sort of answer that question, James, you have to sort of look at what the outcome is. And actually, the way the game is being played is the actual booby trap within the end game is essentially Farage. If I don't get that withdrawal agreement, then I'm going into a pact with Farage, and guess what? You're getting a no deal.
Yeah. Again, I like it until we accommodate who's coming with him at the moment and who's felt the need to run a million miles in the opposite direction. And all the people that would support your thesis are either being chucked out of the party or running a million miles in the opposite direction, aren't they?
Okay. Well, could I ask you a question, James?
It doesn't usually work like that, but you've been such a generous contributor. Of course you can.
So what I would be basically saying is actually what would happen if we had the withdrawal agreement number 4 actually being voted in? Does that not give Boris the opportunity to actually reconcile with those Tories he's actually thrown out?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And maybe that's what Richard Benyon was alluding to when he said, I'm currently without the whip, but perhaps I'll be invited back in again.
So in all, just to sort of conclude, I think Boris isn't lying with the fact that he's saying that he wants to leave on the 31st of October with a deal first. What he's trying to do is actually scare people with one of the biggest...
And he won't dare say that the deal will be the one that we've already rejected 3 times. But that's the ultimate plan.
Absolutely. And the only way, really, to sort of see that, I can see him winning the general election.
Yeah.
But the only way I can sort of see this from a gaming point of view, from an opposition point of view, is really that the Kinnock amendment is actually put through with essentially a confirmatory referendum to actually preempt Boris. So essentially that gets voted on, and then Boris is actually...
So he doesn't take us out on the 31st? Oh, no, he does take us out on the 31st, but under the terms of the withdrawal agreement. But you know a lot of... And I know you know this, so I'm just doing this. I'm just getting my own thoughts in order, Adam, actually, because you've set the little grey cells whirring at a rate of knots. So we do go out on the 31st, not with a no-idea Brexit, but with the Brexit that's been rejected 3 times already. Parliamentarians will be spooked into supporting it because they do believe that he would be mad enough or boxed in enough, actually, perhaps is a fairer way of putting it, to contemplate a no-idea Brexit in a way that, despite her public pronouncements, Theresa May would never have endangered the national interest consciously to that degree. But then you're arguing he'll win a general election having got through a Brexit that a lot of the headbangers describe as not really being Brexit at all.
Well, because essentially he's promised to his party, I was going to get you out by the 31st of October, and I've done it.
But they don't think the withdrawal agreement is really out, otherwise it would have passed with Theresa May's majority.
Yes, possibly, but actually when you're faced with the possibility of actually, and you've alluded to it in your earlier programmes, that actually at this point in time, actually agreeing to the withdrawal agreement isn't going to be too bad a situation.
No, I do believe that, much to my own surprise. I can't... Well, then the question would become, why did he hire Dominic Cummings? He could have just sat tight and done this without any of the Machiavellian administrations that we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Because he's applying gaming theory to it, and Dominic Cummings has basically been is the master reader of gaming theory.
Well, you say he's a master reader of gaming theory. He might be an enthusiastic reader of gaming theory. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's... Because I read a brilliant piece by a journalist called Tom Chivers that I recommend you dig out, because he's also an enthusiastic student of gaming theory, and he said he has a terrible fear that Dominic Cummings is this no-deal threat, is playing chicken with the European Union, but what he hasn't taken into account is the fact that the European Union is an enormous locomotive train on rails, and we're in a little car driving at full speed towards the train on rails, and we've just thrown our steering wheel out the window to demonstrate how courageous we are.
Yeah, or alternatively, there are two games being played here.
A game within a game.
Yes, because essentially there's two types of games. You've got an infinite game, which doesn't have a win or lose, or you have a finite game, which is basically a win or lose.
And that could be really finite. Could be the end of next week, as opposed to necessarily the end of a 5-year parliamentary term.
That is true, but actually, if you sort of understand, the EU is actually they're in an infinite game, which is basically saying the preservation of our relationship is basically tantamount. So we're not going to, so any threats of no deal, etc., aren't going to be working. Whereas within the UK, we are playing a finite game whereby it's win or lose, and that's been essentially the reason why there's been a sort of a Remain stroke, shall we say, exit, bipartisan, sort of fighting each other, because we're actually been treating this as a football match, whereas actually the question which has always needed to be answered was, what is the future relationship of the EU have to be in the future?
You're so right. And I think this is a fair contribution to what you've just said. So that would render the insistence, whether the people doing the insisting realised it or not, and most of them probably didn't, but keeping no deal on the proverbial table, Alex, who's been listening to you, Adam, suggests will turn out to have been not a threat to the EU, but a threat to Parliament.
That's exactly where I'm coming from, James.
What a brilliant call. Why were you nervous? If you're a genuine question.
Because I've spoken with you twice before, and I spoke to you once in relation to Jaguar Land Rover, and the second one was how to resolve Brexit, which was the thing. And the second time I was actually, it appeared to be, I was, quite, I don't know whether it was fine. I appeared to be, I thought it was almost like being shut down, but...
Oh, well, I'm glad that we've put that to rights.
That is. So thank you very much, James.
No, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, and thank you for your thoughtfulness. I mean, just because this is, of course, the great curse of thoughtfulness, is it doesn't necessarily provide any more comforting or reassuring scenarios or conclusions. Quite the opposite, actually, as a friend in Hartlepool demonstrated. The nicest place to be at the moment would be to be subscribing to the school of thought that there is a plan, it's a brilliant plan, it's a beautiful plan, I don't care what it is, and I don't care that they can't tell us what it is, it's a lovely plan. That would be the most comforting and reassuring, perhaps, of scenarios, but I did enjoy that.